is OpenLine.
Johnston, let me lower my chair so I'm in the frame here so you can see me. Welcome to OpenLine on a Thursday night. I hope you're having a good week so far. We'll get the camera straightened out pretty soon. Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Live TV. Tonight, we're going to talk about a very, very serious topic, and we really do hope that you will call in and express your opinions, ask questions of our expert. Our guest tonight is Dr. A.J. Heritage, an assistant professor of psychology at Lipscomb University. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about violent crime and agitators, and you see the topic, what causes it, and how can we prevent it? I know we've asked this question for years, even decades. So, Doctor, welcome. Glad to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You probably get this question a lot. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. You have an impressive resume.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm an assistant professor, like you said, of psychology at Lipscomb University. And I'm also a clinical psychologist, so I have a small private practice seeing clients, mostly teens and families, but I work with a lot of young kids with ADHD and other kind of behavioral issues. But I've done a variety of work in adolescent detention centers, the veterans hospitals, things like that. So I have a pretty broad experience in the clinical psychology realm.
Yeah, so really covering quite a bit, and also some sports medicine and performance, right?
Yeah, some sports psychology, sports performance. I played hockey all my life, and so I kind of bring the psychology and the sports together and work with athletes as well.
Which means, are you from the North?
I'm from Colorado originally,
okay.
But I played hockey in Canada for a couple years and went to college in Minnesota. So I've been all
nice.
over the cold places.
And your resume indicates a certified level 4 USA hockey coach. So you know hockey as well. That's awesome.
I do.
Well, welcome to Nashville. I think you've been here about a year now, right? Or at Lipscomb, you've been there for a year, I should say.
At Lipscomb about a year, but I did my PhD at Vanderbilt, so I've been in Nashville about 10 years now.
So this is fascinating. In the brief time that I had to kind of go over, and I hope that I'll learn a lot from you tonight, because I will start off by saying I get a lot of people who maybe meet me and they're from Nashville and they may not recognize me, and I don't care, but they'll say, I'm sorry, I just don't watch the news. I can't watch the news. It's too depressing, which I understand. And I try to explain to them that we're very cognizant of that here, especially on the local news level, because it's coming in from all directions. And we work very hard to balance our stories out. We have a responsibility to report crime. Sometimes it's not pretty and it's very disturbing. We don't report everything, but we do try to balance it out with positive stories and efforts in the community. We know there are a lot of efforts in the community to reduce violent crime. One of the trends that we've talked about, and we have run an investigative series, an excellent series that you can see on newschannel5.com called Broken, about the juvenile justice system. So many people have chimed in. I want to just focus on juveniles first. We know a lot of cities around the country are dealing with a spike in violent crime right now compared to, years past. I mean, if you look at the long term, it may not be a huge spike in some areas, but compared to previous years. And a lot of people talk about the impact of the pandemic, which we can talk about as well. But what about juveniles? Some of these stories, it seems, when we read the police affidavits when they come in to the newsroom, it's just shocking. It seems these kids are getting younger and younger and younger, and the crimes seem to be even more brazen. What do you think's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I have a little experience working in adolescent detention center with kids 13 to 18 who had committed felonies. And my main takeaway from working there is that pretty much every kid that was in there had some sort of trauma history. They'd experienced something in their background, whether it be abuse or neglect or poverty or some other event that was just changing the way that they thought about the world, the way that they thought about themselves. And so they respond to things with aggression or violence at times, maybe out of a way to protect themselves or get something that they otherwise don't have. And so that almost to a kid was the one thing I kind of took away from my time there. And, I can't say that that's increasing. The rates of trauma among kids are increasing, but, we do know that, as you mentioned, due to COVID, things are changing a little bit,
Right.
and rates of domestic violence and child abuse and things happening in the home went up during COVID as more people were stuck at home. And so we may be seeing some of the results of that as well.
So you mentioned childhood trauma, and I've done a little bit of work with some nonprofits here in Nashville, specifically one on the Family Center, where I learned about what's called an ACE, which is an adverse childhood experience. They work on young parents to teach them how to be better parents, so that maybe the trauma or abuse they suffered, now they're not going to pass that along to their child. They can learn how to be good parents emotionally, also financially stable, and really, work to break the cycle, which makes sense. Are these working, whether it's nonprofits or programs? I know there's a lot of research, and in these juvenile centers, when you face a young person who's had this trauma, who's maybe committed some type of violent crime, there seems initially to be kind of a lack of emotional understanding of responsibility, right?
Right. And, and the experience of trauma really does delay emotional development, right? And it blunt emotional development. So these kids do have a lack of emotional awareness and understanding. And that's part of the treatment for trauma, is learning to understand both their own emotions and the emotions of others. Right. And I think that some of these programs are working for helping parents and helping kids. I think the programs that work the best, the evidence shows us, are the ones that kind of take a holistic approach, where they treat the individual child and the parents with mental health issues, but they also focus on, like you said, financial stability. They focus on education, kind of a holistic, well-rounded support, kind of systems focus. Because just focusing on one piece or another leaves a lot of things still hanging, and it's hard to do trauma-focused work when a child's still living in a traumatic environment.
Yeah, it really is. You mentioned emotional development, how it's stunted, I guess you could say, in some of these kids. I always think that every day I'm trying to grow and develop emotionally, but there are some key years, right, in childhood, where it's, what is that range typically, the really important years where children are developing that kind of part of their brain?
Yeah, so there's a few key periods, and one of them is really young, the first couple years of life, when kids are forming their first attachments to parents or caregivers. And if they are attended to and they're safe and they learn that their needs are going to be met when they cry or when they otherwise express it, then they learn to trust other people. They learn to regulate their emotions from the responses that their parents and caregivers provide them. If you look at really young kids, and they often, if something unexpected happens, they'll look to their parent and see how the parent responds, and then respond with a laugh or a cry, whichever, depending on the parent. So that really first couple of years is really critical. And then actually the teenage years are also really critical in terms of emotional and social development, as kids learn to start to do that on their own rather than having parents manage their emotions for them. So both are kind of critical periods.
Now, do you, as a psychologist, if you're perhaps hearing the news or watching the news locally, and you hear about another carjacking or a shooting, and they've arrested a 12 or a 13 or 14-year-old, gun, that was stolen from an unlocked car. I mean, this is common. Do you automatically kind of have an interest in looking a little deeper in some of these cases, just doing a little research on your own based on all of your knowledge, and kind of, find out more?
Yeah, definitely. The first question it goes through my mind is like, okay, what's going on underneath, right?
Yeah.
What else is happening in this kid's life, or what has happened before that? So I think that there's rarely is it just a kind of impulsive, random. There's nothing. Rarely is there nothing underneath it driving kind of that behavior.
Right. And we're going to take our first break here in just a second. As a society, people who just who obviously fed up and they're scared and they don't want this crime. Some people will say, I don't care how old they are, you need to throw them in jail and throw away the key. But obviously that hasn't proven to be successful in all cases. There's recidivism that, it's got to be a case-by-case basis, and it sounds counterintuitive, but we have to be able to show some level of empathy to these kids despite the crime, especially if it's a first offense. If it's but if it's a first offense, right away, like you said, what's going on? How can we get in there and help and stop this? So we're going to talk more about that. I got a lot of questions for you. Also, the brain development and brain chemistry, there's a lot of research going on. It's really fascinating. Viewers, 737 plus. This is an important topic that affects all of us, and Dr. Heritage is here for the full hour with us, which we appreciate. Take our first break. Be right back.